I'll start. So welcome to the School Board Forum hosted by Windsor on Air. My name is Devin Corral. I will be the moderator for this evening. In person, we have Davis McGraw from Windsor, and on Zoom, we have Bill Yates from West Windsor. So I'll start with the first question. Introduce yourself and explain why you're interested in serving on the school board. Davis, would you like to start?
Sure, I'll go first. So I'm Davis McGraw. I grew up in Windsor and I have spent most of my adult life working in education. So after completing a BA in film studies in 2010, I spent 2 years working at a school-based behavior interventionist in Hartford, Vermont, before moving to the Boston area, where I taught for 3 years in a special education program, an applied behavior analysis program for students with autism spectrum related disorders at the New England Center for Children. During that time, I also completed 20 credits worth of master's level education courses, and that included multisensory language instruction and special education law. I moved back to Windsor a few years back, completed a master's degree in business administration, and currently work as a program specialist for interprofessional continuing education and research at Dartmouth-Hitchcock Medical Center. I've been a member of the Mount Scottney School Board since July of 2021 and have been the board chair since January of 2024, so just a little over a year now. I also sit on the Windsor Southeast Supervisory Union Board and most recently took on a role as the school board liaison on the Windsor Improvement Corporation Board. In addition, I sit on the Windsor on Air board, been there since I think 2019. And I've also worked with other groups in the community to plan and present arts and education events at the Windsor Exchange, Windsor Public Library, Welcome Center, and other spots. My education resume provides me with some of the subject knowledge and experience to effectively carry out my responsibilities as a school director. But my interest in serving the school board is primarily motivated by my lifelong love of this community. Reflecting on my experiences growing up in Windsor, I can think of not only the teachers that I had, but so many good, safe adults in the community, neighbors, friends, coaches, people in my faith community. Everybody kind of played a role in that. And that's the kind of role that I want to play by taking on this sort of responsibility and continuing to take on this sort of responsibility. My hope is that my work on the board helps to actively support those vital members of our school community at large, while presenting some opportunities to make a direct positive impact via my own advocacy and engagement.
All right, so Bill, same question. Introduce yourself and explain why you're interested in serving on the school board.
Well, I have to admit, I don't have anything as polished as Davis has. He is definitely my idol when it comes to preparation and writing ability. Being along, I grew up in Windsor. My father was an educator, 36 years biology, Windsor High School. I graduated from Windsor High School. I am now a West Windsor resident. But there was a vacancy in the West Windsor School Board back before the merging. And so I was asked if I would join as appointed, and I said yes, as I've been an educator for 30 years and had participated at least as a audience member in the Act 46 progress, and was rather disturbed about what the state was asking the education community to do, and also was aware of course, Act 64 and how that had impacted Vermont schools. And so I joined the school board, and I wasn't particularly in favor of the merging of West Windsor and Windsor, but felt very strongly that it should go forth to the voters. And so I supported that process. And when we merged, I've been really happy with, how we've moved forward. My interest in school board, of course, is the fact that, as some of you may realize, at one point in Albert Bridge Elementary School was populated by 20% of my family about 10 years ago. And that's, my children, my siblings' children, and my cousins' children. which is a pretty significant percentage. Um, and since then, I now have an 8-year-old who attends West Windsor, and of course will attend Windsor High School, like I did. And so, in ensuring that the educational opportunities afforded these children um, is robust and continues to improve is something that I strive for. You know, my basic background is, I grew up on the largest land producing farm in New England on Route 44. I have a degree in forestry and horticulture. I have a master's in elementary ed. I have a master's in curriculum and development. I am certified as a principal. And at this point, I work for the Hartford School District as the data administrator. And so I bring to bear a significant amount of knowledge that I believe that the SU and the Mount Scotney School District benefits from. And I would like to continue that, as well as the fact that I am the board chair of the SU Supervisory Union and do the majority of the negotiations with the staff. So I feel very honored and to work with Davis here. He is an amazing individual and is a uh, rare individual that that Windsor should view as a blessed asset. And so I've strayed off the main topic, saying I don't have any notes, but that's basically, the fact that um, right on Route 44 in West Windsor, on February 9th, my first granddaughter was born, and so she will be eventually attending Albert Bridge as well. So the Yates dynasty has continued.
Okay, thank you, Bill. So next question, I'm going to go a little bit out of order. What are the current issues and challenges facing our school district? Bill, would you like to start with that one?
Sure. I think one issues that our school district faces is the uncertainty at, I won't touch upon the federal level, but the uncertainty at the state level. Um, Education funding has gone through multiple iterations within a very short amount of time with very stark uncertainty. And it continues to look upon uncertainty. Um, and our district is very much affected by it, as well as our SU, because we are in a unique situation in which our SU has 3 school districts, 2 of which have choice. And that choice has reared its ugly head in funding issues, because for a small middle elementary school like Heartland and Weathersfield, to be pinched budgetary wise, when you look at the SU budget in local budgets, Mount Scotney School District is fortunate is that in that we don't pay tuition for our high school students. Because the weight upon, I mean, basically, you've got special ed cost. You've got the cost of maintaining buildings. And then, of course, if you add upon that the cost of paying tuition, having no control of that, these school districts are pinched in that they have very little control of, well, very, very little room to be able to adjust cost. Mount Scotney School District, and the merger has allowed West Windsor to um, get out of this issue in that our costs are predictable as along the lines of high school students. Um, I think looking at Windsor High School in particular and the opportunities that these students have, um, such a small high school creates a challenge, which I think the Windsor High School administration and teachers have done a great job, along with the opportunity of HACTC. I've been very pleased with the encouragement and enrollment of students in the tech center, because that adds a diversity for our high school students. But I think at a state level, somebody has to, or some entity has to address the elephant within the budgeting, in that schools construction really needs to start up again. Statewide, our buildings are completely have been ignored. And if the state is going to begin to impose, in the words of the governor, guardrails on spending, in some way, the lack of building maintenance and building construction has to be approached. And so, I don't know if I answered your question. I've kind of, again, I've rambled on, but at least I can stop here and let Davis sort of jump in.
All right, so Davis, what are the current issues and challenges facing our school district?
Sure. And I appreciate a lot of so much of what Bill brings to just in that Bill can jump in here and just quickly address with detail these kind of like higher level, the things that as a school administrator, you're dealing with that every day. And one of my later responses here is that what makes up the board are all of these different perspectives and experiences and really subject matter expertise. And I've been looking forward to doing this panel with Bill, or this forum with Bill, because I think that we do represent we're both in education, but we come at it from very different angles and have some different abilities to address these things. The budgetary elements that Bill brought up are front of mind. With my kind of behavior background and really student focused experience, the thing that comes up to me as an immediate challenge that we have addressed a little bit has to do with information technology in schools. I know that we had our cell phone policy that we did at the SU level went into effect last year. We've gotten really good feedback about it, but I think that it's the kind of thing that we just need to stay on top of. I know that the legislature right now is considering possibly a bill that would impact schools across the state and remove cell phones from classrooms or from school buildings entirely. I'm not sure the exact scope of it, and I think it may still be in committee, so it's not really, I don't know where it's going to land. But the nature of information technology is that I know that I struggle with mediating my relationship with it. I think that that's a really common experience for professional adults in the society. And thinking back, being a millennial person who grew up as sort of the first digital native and remembering, learning how to be on these platforms like AIM and having social life migrate to those spaces and dealing with some of those pressures and that discourse that sort of transcends the in-person. That's not something that's going to stop changing. And I think that we as school directors really need to be working with our administrators and be responsive to that. And I say that as a challenge because, is that my 2 minutes? Okay.
Okay, so what attributes and behaviors are essential for school board members? Davis?
I touched on this a little bit at the beginning of my last response, right? School board members need to be ready to learn, collaborate, and communicate with each other and with the whole community. Education has a professional lexicon that can be really challenging to decipher for folks who aren't working in that field or experiencing it day in and day out. I think it's really important for board members to be willing and able to build up the skill to be able to understand that lexicon, but also be able to translate it for the rest of the community. And also encourage the folks who are, at board meetings and also working with the community to just make an effort to put things in lay terms as often as possible. If we're using too many abbreviations or getting too deep into that specialized language, I think that it gets really hard for people to understand exactly what's going on. And that I think when we do that, we're not really able to completely do our job as school directors. Building relationships with the administration and others just within the school community, I think is as important as that translational work. We shouldn't be in the business of micromanaging our buildings as school directors, but we do need to be able to engage in a way that allows us to effectively provide direction when we need to. Above it all, I think if we're talking about behaviors and attributes, I think humility is really important. One thing that I think of having been, on this side of the table and on that side of the table is when a community member is compelled to show up and voice something before a community board of elected officials, it's probably not it's probably not their first choice of a thing to do that evening. It can be motivated by really strong feelings. Like, people can be angry, upset, all that kind of thing. They might stumble with their words or come across or be very heavily critical. And I think that it's incredibly important sitting on this side of the table and being in this community leadership role to understand that and have some space for it and be willing to listen and take things in and not necessarily reciprocate that energy. I think that there's a lot of responsibility that comes with this. I mean, and obviously, yeah, if people are being like horribly profane and offensive or personally attacking people, that's one thing. But I mean, at the end of the day, like I'm in a position of authority within this institution, and like I should be criticized if you don't understand something, if you don't agree with something, if you have questions. I mean, I would like to hear them, and it's not really the prerogative of people in the community to try to be super nice all the time if they're upset about something. But it is my job to do my best to take that in and, when I can provide a response, at least be able to acknowledge that I'm hearing them, even if we're not always going to agree at the end of the day. You can't please everyone being in these kind of roles, but you have to be able to listen. And one thing I've learned from having done this is even folks who I frequently disagree with, there are always those times where something comes up that's like, what, I wouldn't have thought of that, it steers me towards policy or towards issues that may not be as apparent to me. So it's incredibly valuable. And you have to have humility, you have to have empathy to be able to effectively serve that function.
Bill, same question. What attributes and behaviors are essential for school board members?
Well, I'm not sure I can add much to what Davis said, but the humility piece is really important to me personally. I often have my mother's voice in the back of my head, speaking to me, and the quote she would use was, "Bill, don't be an ass," because um, one of the mantras I use for yourself, just because you're right doesn't give you an excuse to be an ass. And so I know that's kind of a, a bit abrupt, but basically to be able to hold in my own opinion and listen to those around me, the especially as Davis pointed out, when community members come, and even more so when students take the time to show up to school board meetings. They are extremely knowledgeable on what's happening in the school right now. And one thing I do miss horribly is the fact that having a student on the board. We had a student on the board, and he brought so much to our discussions, even though he wasn't able to vote, but he really impacted my opinion. And I believe he impacted Davis as well, as when he spoke upon something, it really held weight because it was a perspective from that of a student. Um, me personally, with my years' experience on the board is, and especially with other past superintendents, I refuse to be bullied by school administrators. Um, and bullied is sort of a strong term, but it really is what I mean is managed. I refuse to be managed by uh, school administrators. And I'd have to say that doesn't really happen now. It has happened in the past, and I think it is the board's responsibility to lead the um, the school district in our position. And it's not the position of school administrators to do that, to manage the board and manage the staff.
Thank you, Bill.
Well, yeah. And so, yeah.
Um, you ran out of time. Next question. How would you address issues of diversity, equity, and inclusion within the school district? We'll go to Davis.
So our schools, if we are going to do our job as an educational community, our schools have to be a place where students are physically and psychologically safe, regardless of their race, ethnicity, religion, socioeconomic, housing, immigration status, sexuality, gender expression. Any of that stuff, we need to have students able to show up and be their authentic selves every single day at school. Supporting all of our students means supporting all of our students. That's it, full stop. Diversity, equity, inclusion programs, that is the goal of that. That is the entire purpose. And I know, I understand that it is a very culturally hot issue right now. I think that there is a lot of conjecture about what the intention or delivery of that is. But my understanding, and this is as somebody who I have worked in schools for most of my adult life, I don't work in a school anymore, but I continue to work in education. And even when there have not been diversity, equity, inclusion, or JEDI or DEIB or whatever permutation of that acronym you have, that's the goal. And those ideas and knowledge and skills and attitudes have existed in one form or another within educational systems as long as I've been involved in them. Our supervisory union, I think in the past, since I've been around and probably a few years before, has done, I think, a really good job of adopting policies that I think fall within that area. And part of it is compliance with what the state has asked us to do, right? We've had legislation passed the state. I know that we have equity quality standards that provide us with the direction to do those things. But I'll make clear that, I also, again, from my own experience, I support those things. I support those initiatives. And I'm going to continue to support those efforts. I've seen what it looks like, even in my time on the board, when students engage with that kind of programming. And it isn't to divide and shame students. It is to provide students with some of the tools to be able to have difficult conversations, to be able to seek out or to be encouraged to seek out opportunities like learning opportunities and engage with discourse and texts and people who may not be from where they're from or look like they look or speak the language that they speak, and gain perspective and practice that ability to self-reflect and be a member of a broader community. When you have those kind of things going on, and honestly, whether they're centered under a program the way that they are here, which I think is a good thing, or diffused around a school system, it's the kind of stuff that helps communication improve, helps you build relationships. It spurs on critical thinking, which is one of the goals that our district has in our strategic plan, and I think is the ultimate thing that we want to do as educators and as school directors. It's growth happens, learning happens. So what I would do to address the issues of it is I would continue supporting the policies that we have. I believe in continuous improvement. I think that and I think that we actually are charged to look at those policies on a pretty regular timetable, because policies shouldn't be set in stone and should be updated. But yeah, I think staying the course and continuing to do what we think is best for our students, which I think is those policies and more.
Excellent. Thank you, Davis. We have lost Bill. In the light of time and keeping things moving, I'm going to mark questions that Bill has missed. And I'll continue asking Davis questions until we get Bill back. How would you prioritize spending to meet the needs of students within our current budgetary challenges in Vermont?
Right on. And yeah, this is where I think Bill made some excellent points earlier on. Oh, we're losing all sorts of people. So Bill touched on this, but the reality of budgeting for any local district in Vermont is that a lot of our major cost drivers, things like healthcare, special education costs, materials costs, like he was talking about, buildings and grounds, a lot of it really is not within our local control that we do have. But our ability to meaningfully change those budget numbers and control them and continue to provide high quality education, it's a pretty narrow band. My top priority, especially right now, and this is almost verbatim the direction that I provided our administrators who work on the budget with our budgeting community, is to make sure that the programs that we have in place right now are able to continue functioning and find efficiencies where you can find them without undercutting those programs. Pursuing a 21st century education that incorporates those STEAM subject areas, science, technology, engineering, arts, and math through active critical engagement, it means ensuring that all of those disciplines have a home within our schools. So it's the kind of thing where you can't really, and I've never really been in a place where I'm willing to say like, well, we'll cut this program or another. You can't really prioritize because everything supports everything else, right? Like there are going to be students who learn really, really well about math in a didactic one-to-one classroom setting. There's going to be students who learn about math through music, which is heavily mathematical. There's students who are going to learn about math through sports, right? I mean, all of that learning is a holistic process, whether you're intentionally designing it that way or not. I think we do better when we approach education with that intention. So it's important to make sure all those programs are funded. I also believe, and later question is going to address that because it brings up the governor's proposal. I think that we need to continue exploring avenues for cooperation and consolidation with surrounding school districts, but in a way that makes sense for all of us. I know that at a state level, looking into things like boards of cooperative educational services or BOCES that you might have heard of, it's a way that districts can work together to pool resources and provide special education services in a more cost-effective way, but also improving the quality of some of those services. I think that we're at a place right now with the structure of Vermont education, with the sheer number of districts and facilities and administrators that we need to start moving into the 21st century and do some of that consolidation with our student outcomes first and foremost, but also with cost in mind. We really have to balance those two things.
All right, thank you, Davis. Next question, since you touched on it, what are the advantages and the disadvantages of the governor's district consolidation plan? Yeah,
I'm glad I got to make that segue. It would have been weird to have to come back to it. So I read over the brief of the plan, and I've been taking in the sort of the high level and some of the more like nuts and bolts part. I will say that the broad conceptual basis of it that I covered in my last response, consolidation is the thing that we do need to be looking into to some degree. It's important. Sharing resources with the surrounding districts and increasing our buying power from that local level up is really important. And I'll actually just read from the brief. There's a really good statement in the conclusion that says the proposed governance changes aim to strengthen the Vermont system by simplifying the structure and achieving greater operational scale. By consolidating the number of school districts, the plan seeks to enhance efficiency and resource sharing, thereby reducing redundancies and administrative burden. Conceptually, I agree with all of that. I think that it makes sense. Where I think there are disadvantages are in really two key things. One of them is the scale of the plan. A lot of what I do professionally now and what was a large part of the most recent, degree level learning I did is in change management. I think that it's a really, really tall order to go from 119 school districts to 5. My understanding is that the proposal puts that, I think, an under 5-year transition, which I don't think is realistic. And the other aspect of it, I guess I don't really quite understand the reason to go from like this scale to that scale so quickly. I think that you're kind of asking for implementation problems when you do that. And the other thing is that, and this isn't in that high level, but within this plan is a plan to increase school choice and send public and route public money to private school vouchers, which I mean, unfortunately has been a hallmark of a lot of this administration's plans over the years. I think Vermonters have said repeatedly that that isn't something that we want to do. When you start removing public money from public school systems, public schools have less money. It's a pretty straightforward formula. And I think that if we're going to make our public schools better, we need to keep funding public schools and working on improving those. And retaining a degree of local control and interest articulation, right? One of the real issues that I have with this plan and the scale of it is that when you go from 119 districts to 5, this position doesn't really mean anything anymore, right? You end up having a board, what is it? I think the proposal is to have 5 people on each of those statewide school boards that are full-time positions, and it puts things in that strata where you're going to start having the money of politics going into it. They're going to be these highly sought out positions. You're going to have campaign spending going to it. You lose the real local touch with it, and you get other interests involved, which I don't think is good for public education and for articulating the voice of people in communities. And I acknowledge that in the plan, I think it's like a school committee. You would have smaller school committees, but I mean, the scope of that responsibility gets so small that it doesn't really make clear how meaningful that is at all, especially if it's, under this other board that's set at such a higher level from what you are. If you consider that every school building or every grouping of school buildings have these groups of 5 that are supposed to work with these very small discretionary budgets, it doesn't make sense to me. So yeah, I think again, consolidation, resource sharing, that's common sense right now. We need to be doing some of that because we are working in a mid 20th century structure of our school system. But consolidating control at that close to the state level and that far away from local control, I don't think it's good school governance. And I just don't really think it's what Vermonters want. I mean, we tend to like local control of the state. I think that we can negotiate it, but yeah. I think the disadvantages weigh the advantages of that program.
Thank you, Davis. Bill, glad to see that you're back. We went through a couple of questions, so I'll be asking you 3 questions.
Outstanding.
So,
My computer decided to update.
oh yeah, that always happens. We'll go back to the one that we started with. How would you address issues of diversity, equity, and inclusion within the school district?
Well, I think we need to address it how the school board has been addressing it. And granted, it is a political hot button right now when you look at it through the lens of identity politics. But the reality is, it is about treating everyone with a level of respect, regardless of their beliefs. Most of human society, and I'll try not to get on too much of a tangent, most of human society is fantasy. It is based within a human construct. And when you begin to pick and choose what human construct you wish to accept, either you accept them all or you don't accept any of them. If we don't have control of others' particular beliefs, what we do have control is the ability to treat others with a level of respect and kindness so that we can be civil and work towards a positive society. And I think that's what this topic is all about. It's not this belief versus that belief. It's not whether or not, people can transition from one gender to another. People believe one religion or the other. It's to be able to be kind and considerate and tolerant of others' belief and understanding that we don't have control over what other people believe. And so, and then of course you get into the fact, I was of the first generation of special ed kids. And so that to be able to include individuals of different abilities. I think that's really one of the most difficult challenges of education today, to be able to create an educational situation in which those that don't function within a 20th century educational construct um, are able to be successful in the 21st century. And of course, that has to do with a majority of male children, you know, to be able to sit quietly, behave within a classroom. We need to adjust our educational setting to meet children where they're at. And that's included in inclusion. It's not just about people who have differing social, religious, cultural ideas that we do. It's the fact that we don't all learn the same way. We don't all grow in the same speed. We need to be able to meet children and staff and community where they're at and be tolerant and accepting that we're all pretty much the same, but we're not all exactly the same. I'll yeah, I'll stop there.
That's great. Thank you, Bill. Next question for you. How would you prioritize spending to meet the needs of students with our current budgetary challenges in Vermont?
Budgetary challenges in Vermont. Well, I don't know. Dave, is this where you went off on, or is that another question? Where I chimed in, you were talking about the governor's plan.
Yeah, that's the next question. So you'll have
Okay.
we'll have a chance to talk about that.
Okay, thank you. Um, Education has two pieces to it, and this may be oversimplifying, but I feel very strong about it. There's two things that make educational successful for children. And it is engagement and relationships. Okay. That's it. Engagement and relationships. And both of those things require people and it require talented, innovative, energetic individuals. And to do that, we have to attract those individuals. And so, granted, most of educational spending is around staffing, and that's never going to change. Dealing with budgeting, and I know we have a meeting coming up to it, but when you look at all educational institutes, this includes college as well, is that you are hiring especially when you're talking about certified teachers, highly qualified educational individuals. And that's going to be expensive. And it's very different than the private world. When you look at private business, if you look at pictures of a car factory back in the 1970s, and look at that same assembly lines in the night in today, you can look at a very different sort of situation. Far fewer people on the factory floor. And that's what has allowed American business to move forward and increase productivity. You can't do that in education because we're not producing widgets. We're not producing automobiles. We're not producing food or anything. We are educating young minds, which require engagement and relationships. And you have to have people on that. Computers can't do it. You just can't do it because It just doesn't work that way. And that's really important to understand. And so educational spending has to take that into consideration. Education is expensive. It's going to remain expensive, and it's going to continue to get more expensive. There are things that we can do to mitigate that expense, but that requires long-term planning. We can't just consolidate and close schools and send all the kids to another school. You can't ignore the fact, you can't ignore geography, and you can't ignore transportation. You have to look at the fact that you have to be able to consolidate in Vermont, we're going to have to build new buildings in different locations so that we can consolidate. But I'm getting off topic on that. So yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, it's about people.
Thank you, Bill.
Mm.
So your next question, what are the advantages and disadvantages of the governor's district consolidation plan?
Well, I think I touched on it a couple part. The governor's plan attempts to impose private sector ideas upon a public sector institution so that you take and you control spending based upon numbers and calculations and so forth without taking into consideration the fact that you have transportation, you have geography, you have a crumbling infrastructure. And I'm not talking a little bit of crumbling. I'm talking that buildings that are now unsafe. If you look at buildings up in the Burlington area, you just have to look at Hartford High School. You have to look at Woodstock High School. Look at these buildings are 10, 20, 30 years beyond their expected lifespan. And that long-term planning involves, hey, can we build a consolidated high school to not only control educational spending, but also add value to our educational spending? Those opportunities are everywhere in Vermont. You look at the I-91 corridor, you look at the I-89 corridor, those opportunities exist. But what it takes is the state to enact some long-term planning within its consolidation instead of these knee-jerk reactions and in trying to impose um, business-like constraints upon the public sector. Take Act 46 as an example. Be like, okay, we need to consolidate. Here's the steps, X, Y, and Z. You have, what was it, 18 months or 24 months to do this. You have to start planning 5, 10, 20 years in the future about how our population is going to be and to look at it as a long-term process because there's a lot of things in the way. There's an amazing opportunity in the towns around us in that we have I-99, I-91, you have exit 9, and at exit 9, you have basically 2,000 high school students within 30 minutes of that location. And so look at that opportunity and then apply some spending and some money and constructing, and then you can consolidate. And so also, I'll throw in the fact that if you look at the data, and it's extremely clear, student outcomes in charter schools or private schools is awful. It is absolutely horrendous. People like the governor look at private schools that are existing. If you look at KUA, for an example, be like, oh, those students are doing X, Y, and Z. But the simple fact is they cherry pick. If you take that and try to, and basically they're gathering students who are motivated from wealthy families who have very high degree of educational um, parentage, and then applying it to a private institution. When you do that on a larger scale, which have done in states, it's happened, and the outcomes for student success are just awful. Uh, so,
Okay, thank you.
so in short, I'm not really positive on the governor's plan.
Thank you, Bill. So this is kind of a data question that was submitted by the public. What are the student teacher ratios and student total staff ratios for Windsor and West Windsor Elementary grades?
So Bill, I got the best numbers we could get on this. This would be totally a cool question for this. This is a really great question for a school board meeting because we have the administrators and the folks who work day in and day out more closely with this data and may have it more on hand. But I did get this in advance. I asked Christine Bourne, our superintendent, what we have right now is an approximation because admittedly we have folks in our technology office, in our SU offices working on a report to the state right now to get the most accurate figures. And the person who's been doing that has been out sick for 2 days. So we couldn't get the numbers as they stand. Christine's best approximation, and this is only for K-5 because that's the easiest place to relate student to teacher ratios, is that an ABS, so I'll start with saying ABS has 73 students as of last year. Windsor School has 599 students. I think that number isn't broken down into K through 5, but it gives you some sense of the scale of those two buildings in total. Yeah, Bill's shaking his head because I think 599 is K-12 numbers,
total,
right?
Yeah,
That's K-12 numbers. So, I mean, yeah. For K-5, ABS, it's about a 1 to 9 teacher to student ratio, and Windsor, it's about a 1 to 13.5. And just caveat again, those are quick calculations that our superintendent did and provided for this. Because that report's being worked on, we'll have that data soon. And I think that's something that we could make sure that we share at a school board meeting. But right now that's as close as we get. I don't know if you have any more info on that one, Bill, than I do.
I can talk in detail. I submitted the report to the state for Hartford, but that's my job.
There you go.
But I'm not going to share any of that. But yeah, I mean, typically that sounds about right. And it really all depends on who you classify as a classroom teacher and who you don't classify as a classroom teacher. I think definitely think there's room between in cooperation between Albert Bridge and the Windsor schools to begin to share resources and to be able to cut down on the number of teachers required. And they've started to do that in many ways.
Mhm.
And, when the merger first happened, there was always that caveat in that, oh, well, they're going to close down ABS. They're going to close down ABS. The reality is, between the two buildings and between our supervisory, our combined school district, we can't close down either building because we don't have the room. We don't have the space. The Windsor schools they're crowded enough to the point where they've had to kick out the tech department to a different building because they needed that room. We just don't have the space. We can't, which is kind of, when you talk about buildings and size and classroom space, and this is not a negative thing. We've filled both buildings, and so there's no way that we could close one building and consolidate. Um, so, but I think there is possibility to be able to um, share resources. And I know we have Windsor students attending ABS, and we have West Windsor students attending, Windsor. And I think that cooperation within a single district has been very beneficial. I don't know. I'm kind of off topic again. My ADHD kicks in.
Thank you, Bill. So the last planned question we have, I wanted to end with this one. What is your vision for education in this community? Um, would you like to start, Bill?
Sure. Education for the community. Well, one of my visions is the fact that our community, West Windsor combined with Windsor, and then when you look out into the SU, we do not have the capacity for pre-kindergarten education. It just doesn't exist within our district or our supervisory union, which means that we are dependent upon private pre-Ks around the area that we actually have to pay for. And again, I think Davis put it well, when you start to send public money to private institutes, then we begin to lose it. I look at what Hartford has been able to do with full day pre-K, and they are reaping the benefits educationally to have those students within their buildings on a full day basis to deliver services on early education intervention that our district and our SU is not. And so that's one thing within the community I like to be able to expand. And I've been slowly championing that, to be able to expand our capacity for early education. And even to step back even further, early education starts at birth, training parents at the importance of helping parents with resources to be able to understand that those early years impact so much of what happens in the later years, to be able to have those students come in and have a positive experience, pre-K, kindergarten, to be able to still be enthusiastic about education through K-5, to be able to go to middle school and not just survive middle school, but to thrive. And then when they go into high school with that, all the skill sets that they need to be able to sharpen and find the beginning path in life. And so I think that's kind of what I'm looking at to expand.
Thank you. Davis, same question. What is your vision for education in this community?
Sure. I'm just going to quickly appreciate what Bill was saying about early childhood education there too. And I mean, Bill has, if you've been to any school board meetings, that is something that Bill has really consistently brought up and championed the entire time I've been on the board before. It's incredibly important, I think. And especially with I don't have kids myself. What I tell people when they're like, why are you on the school board? You don't have kids. I'm like, well, my friends who have kids don't have time to do stuff like this and want to be with their kids. So I do try to talk to them a lot. And I know about the waiting lists and the costs of those kind of programs. And from on the board perspective, the money that it pulls out of our public system, to Bill's point. And I think, with programs like Head Start running into funding issues right now, it becomes even more difficult and more important to really try to find solutions to get, to have earlyhood child education be an option. So I greatly appreciate you bringing that up. What I thought about with the vision, it's a little bit more, 20,000 mile like view. I really, I view our school community as something that really extends beyond our buildings. One concept that, our principal, Jen Aldrich over in West Windsor, brings up frequently is the idea of place-based learning. We are in such a beautiful, varied historical environment around here. I think that really engaging our students in that sense of place, having kids go out of the buildings, going places like Paradise Park. There's fantastic outdoor classrooms by Albert Bridge School, but then, historical sites, the Constitution House, Precision Museum. I mean, our proximity to Boston and New York and all these things, we have so many opportunities to get our students out of the buildings and learn in their surrounding environment and learn with our community, right? One of the first things I think I talked about in this is there are so many awesome, talented, smart, caring adults in this community who have so much to share and teach to our students. I think that we have a lot of really good programs, getting students into our local hospitals and local businesses, getting that kind of vocational support. That's, in one of my previous roles, I did a lot of vocational placement work with students, and it's so important for kids to have that kind of contact with the professional world before they're just thrust into it. Broadly, I want us to be able to provide students with opportunities to discover and expand upon new ideas through their education. But then I also want that education to guide them to take their existing interests and find educational opportunities in that. I think it needs to be this continuous holistic process that's in our classrooms, out of our classrooms, in our buildings, out of our buildings. And the last thing I'll say, I think that it's something that we've really adopted into the way that we use language and kind of conceive of administration and hierarchy in our schools. But we've taken to calling our principals lead learners, right? And it speaks to this idea that we want every member of the school community, whether you're an instructor, you consider yourself a facilitator, staff member, student, food service, director, administrator, we're all learning from each other this whole time. Bill pointed out, having a student on the board, we learned a ton about what's going on in those buildings, and it informed our policy making through learning. That student got to learn about what it is to be on a board and to, function in Robert's rules and to exercise their agency and to have a voice. Learning opportunities in the process of human learning, right? It starts well before you go into school and it continues the rest of your life. So the best that we can use our resources and make just tap into the possibilities that come from engaging our entire community. The more we can do that, I think the more successful we're going to be, and the better educational experience our students are going to have.
Thank you, Davis. Are there any questions from the public? Do we have any questions in the chat, Paula? Yeah. All right. Okay. Well, thank you both so much. And I guess we'll conclude.
All right.
Yeah.
Thanks, Devin. Thanks, Paula. Thanks, everyone, for being here.
Yes, thank you. I appreciate the opportunity to have someone listen to me. But more importantly, I always like to listen to Davis, he's such a unique, and I'm always jealous of Davis because he's able to say things much better than I can, and the fact that he's able to go to the school community more often than I can, and to hear his perception in his eloquent way.
Good night, everybody.
A good night.